Hello, everybody. It's really lovely to be here. My name's Toby. If we haven't met before, I'm one of the elders here at Barton Faversham. And we're going to be, as Sandra says, continuing through our series in Mark's Gospel today. I wanted to ask you a question first, which is, who was the last person you heard exclaim proudly, "I'm a self-made man"? That's usually the men who say this, isn't it? I don't know who the last woman was I heard, a successful businesswoman that actually says that. Nobody gave me anything. I got to where I am with grit and determination and a chip on my shoulder. It turns out our culture is pretty keen on this rags to riches underdog story. The founding of the American dream is based on the idea that anybody coming from anywhere in the world with any amount of money can become great, can make their fortune in the land of opportunity. Now, we've all enjoyed films where we see this premise where the protagonist begins with nothing or in a place of utter obscurity and then rises to the top as a result of their perseverance and their character. Films like Rocky or The Pursuit of Happiness or Slumdog Millionaire, they thrive, don't they, on planting this idea in us that we too could be great if only the right set of circumstances and attitudes were present in us. And so our culture values the hustle mindset. It's about pushing past limits, staying busy, and taking extra steps to succeed. The idea is that the path to success and greatness is there inside you, lying dormant and untapped, just waiting to be unleashed. Now, as a secondary school teacher, I can safely say the only thing that had been lying dormant inside me at the end of June was the will to live until the end of term. It's all about setting your own goals, you see. But a bit like me in the middle of term 6, I think we all feel like our resource levels are pretty low a lot of the time. My ambitions don't generally stretch to starting up a new startup business to then sell for £1 million, most weeks anyway. And sometimes I'm having a good day if I manage to cook dinner using a recipe, manage a difficult conversation with my line manager at work, or I summon up the enthusiasm to put heartfelt thought into an action point from the last elders meeting. That last one was a joke. We don't have action points at elders meetings. Now, we're going to spend some time today considering how it is that Jesus wants us to approach challenges for which we are woefully under-equipped, under-skilled, and under-resourced, and why that is exactly how he intends it to be. So as we heard from Sandra, in this passage we see the disciples returning to Jesus after the first time in which they've been sent out on a serious mission trip. Without their rabbi, they have been proclaiming the good news, healing the sick and casting out demons, having been instructed by Jesus to only rely on the hospitality of those friendly to the gospel message, and having to walk the entire way. We can only imagine how exhausted they must have been arriving home, which is where we see them at the beginning of this passage. Now, we recently hiked a mountain in the Lake District, a mild mountain, I'm now told. I feel a lot less good about my accomplishments. And if you told me at the top of the third peak of Cat Bells that we needed to see to the needs of a massive group of spiritually and physically hungry people, I think I would have just jumped off. In all seriousness, I think I would have responded the same way that the disciples do when these large crowds start to gather in the place where Jesus had taken them to rest. Can't you send them away, Jesus? I mean, we're really tired and there's barely enough food for us, let alone all these people. And you did take us to this place for rest, after all. I think it's really understandable that they might feel a bit aggrieved to suddenly be thrust back into service. Jesus then adds salt to their wounds, where he not only spends the rest of the day teaching the crowds, which would of course have involved the disciples doing all sort of people management and going, you go stand over there, you come stand, no, not over there, that's too close to the water. But then he tells the disciples, in no uncertain terms, go and find them something to eat. And to my ears, their response to this, in verse 37, it smacks of sarcasm, but that might just be me. I hear it like this. Oh, should we just go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? Now, I expect the disciples were probably a little bit more respectful towards Jesus than this, but as all the parents in the room know, when the hangry brain takes over, those rules of ordinary respect and decorum, they vanish, assuming they were ever present in the first place. A denarius, this unit of money, it was about a day's wage for a first century laborer. So we're talking over half a year's wages that would have been needed to find enough food for all these people. It's not conceivable that the disciples, even pooling their money together, would have had even half that amount, and certainly not after what they've just been through. And so when Jesus is asking them to go find the food, we can't expect Jesus expects them to have the money to go and buy this food. I wonder if you've ever felt this way when a seemingly outrageous task presents itself to you. I recall when we were planning our 10th wedding anniversary party, or something similar. Naomi loves to plan parties, could have been anything. And when we were discussing food, the option of having caterers come in and doing the event for us was floated. And I recall being incredulous at the amount of money it was going to cost. And I thought to myself, no, let them bring their own food. We'll call it a bring and share. Thus, that is what we did. And when the disciples ask, when Jesus asked the disciples, how much food have you got? They reply, famously, 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Now, in first century Israel, 5 loaves and 2 fish was apparently about enough to keep one child or one working adult full for an afternoon. Now, my immediate thoughts on that are, that is one big child, or it's a person working a lot harder than I do of an afternoon. It's probably the latter. But regardless, this was a single person's packed lunch, what they managed to come up with, and not a wealthy person either. Essentially, it's a pitiful, ridiculous amount of food to even consider declaring to Jesus. In the bone-tired, exasperated state I expect the disciples were in, I wonder exactly how they delivered the news to Jesus. I wonder if it was with more than a bit of mild exasperation as they checked their packs. 5 loaves and 2 fish. I wonder if the disciples were trying to get Jesus to see how dire the situation was, to explain why they had just urged him to send the people away into the surrounding towns to go buy their own food. Now, we know how this story ends. So it might seem strange to us, given what the disciples have just returned from in their first century mission trip, where they healed diseases, cast out demons, that they wouldn't immediately just expect Jesus to solve the problem. That's how we read this, isn't it? We read this and go, oh, guys, why don't you just ask Jesus? Jesus can obviously do that for you, can't he? But that wasn't their response. But you and I are much different. Well, I'm always forgetting yesterday's blessings when today's trials come. It seems like it's part of being human to do that. And note that Mark doesn't record Jesus asking the disciples how much food we have or how much food is in our pack, but he specifically asks them, how much food do they have? Verse 38, Jesus says, how many loaves do you have? He asked. Go and see. My response in that situation would be, oh, come on, Jesus, aren't you chipping in? What's in your pack, Jesus? Do you have anything that you could contribute? After such a long period of ministry and solo travel, it's not surprising that they're going to have very little in the way of food and in the way of patience too. Meeting people's needs takes a lot from us. And I think we can probably empathize with the disciples if they did respond to Jesus with more than a bit of exasperation. But as is so often the case with Jesus' miracles, he's got a greater purpose through performing them than just the immediate need of the moment. In Mark chapter 2, for example, he healed the paralyzed man who was lowered through the roof only after demonstrating that his sins were also forgiven by God. In chapter 3, he heals a man with a withered hand on the Sabbath, not only to show compassion to the man in question and his authority over nature, but also to call out how twisted the Pharisees' view of the Sabbath had become. So what about the loaves and fishes? What's the greater idea that Jesus is aiming to communicate about his kingdom through multiplying this food? Now, we've already noted that Jesus wants to do something with what the disciples have brought with them. He doesn't want the disciples to buy food from the nearest town. He isn't interested in outsourcing this work to somebody else like the disciples are. He wants to use what they have brought, meager and depleted though it is. Why? What's the symbolism behind Jesus feeding the 5,000 this way rather than, say, creating 1,000 denarii, 1,000 coins, and sending the disciples off to purchase enough food, or having a caravan filled with bread pass by at just the exact moment that all these people turn up? Why do it this way? Jesus plainly could have orchestrated either of these miracles instead. So why choose to feed the 5,000 this way? And I think the answer comes in what Jesus wants his disciples to be able to do after he leaves them. Now, God's desire for his fallen creation isn't that he alone goes around like a handyman, repairing all the tears we've made in his fabric, healing a cripple there, feeding a bunch of hungry people here. Rather, he wants to train us up to be part of his handyman team, to stretch a metaphor slightly. Part of the work that he calls us to as his disciples is to begin the process of correcting the ways that the world has fallen since its creation. Broadly, to re-establish a culture of goodness in the world. And the only way that we are able to accomplish those kinds of things is if we're trusting in his desire and his ability to provide the skill and the power to do so. Every time we entrust something small in our possession or our skill set to God and ask him to use it, we exercise a little thing called faith. And like a muscle, each time we exercise it, it gets a little bigger. It keeps on growing until eventually we're able to participate in massive missions from God that seemed impossible before. And we see this idea elsewhere in the Gospels. In Matthew's Gospel, we hear a story where Jesus talks about a story that came to be known as the parable of the talents. Now, in the story, a master is going away, and he entrusts 3 servants with different amounts of money, instructing them to try and make more of it by the time he returns. The money in this story was called a talent. 2 of the servants, one of them was given 5 talents, one was given 2 talents. They report back to the master that they've done some thrifty work and have doubled their master's investment. But the servant who was given 1 talent decided to hide his master's coin, claiming that he was scared of the master's return, wrongly painting him as a hard man who reaps where he does not sow. And so he didn't put the talent to work. Upon returning, the master was greatly pleased with the first 2 servants and rewarded them equally, and quite furious with the 3rd servant. Just as in this parable, each of us possesses a different starting amount of material, be that financial resources or time, energy, connections, knowledge, education, or skills. And just as in the parable, God's pleasure comes when we have faithfully plowed these into his work, allowing him to multiply them like seeds that produce 100 times that which was sown. And the more we successfully entrust what we've got to God, waiting expectantly for him to multiply our offering, the more I think our pool of resources or our pool of talents grows, and the more he's able to accomplish through us. That might be through us gaining more resources, be they financial or time or energy or skill, etc., which can then be used for a greater harvest, or it might be through our increase in faith, that he'll use our small provisions to great effect, thus leading us to taking more opportunities that we would have ignored otherwise. Now, hopefully you're not hearing me say this and thinking, oh, great, I can just get away with offering a tiny bit and God will turn it into loads. That would be a misreading of the loaves and fishes. I wonder, did you spot? How much did Jesus take from the disciples in order to perform the miracle? Some of their bread and fish. I'm sure he could have done the miracle. This is Jesus we're talking about. He could have taken one loaf of bread, one fish. He probably could have done it with none of it. But he takes all of it. He asks, what's in your pack? And he takes it all. Literally the entirety of what they could provide to him. Not because he needed it, but because Jesus knew this was how the disciples were going to grow. I think this might be the hardest part of the passage to let into our hearts. The opposing desire of holding something back for myself because I might need it. What about the journey home? Or because it would only be sensible. Or perhaps worse, because I deserve it. I walked all the way here. It's simply the normal wisdom of this age to think that way. We're in a culture that prioritizes self-care and self-love before the love of another. Put on your own oxygen mask before helping those around you is good advice, and you should definitely still do that. But Jesus here is asking something that sounds almost as unwise as putting an oxygen mask on somebody else before yourself. Risking your own harm, your own suffering, your own loss to protect or serve another person. Jesus is saying to his disciples, give me all that you have, and I will make more than enough from it. You might be thinking, how might we see this attitude played out in our daily lives? Gold star, if you were, that's the next bit. Perhaps you're having a conversation with a colleague, and suddenly there's an opportunity to speak about your church family, or with the Bible even, or Jesus. Give me all that you have means not holding back a morsel of the truth because of fear or judgment or loss of status. Or perhaps you've gone through a difficult period in a relationship and you aren't quite sure what the right response is to the person who's wronged you. Give me all that you have might mean offering all the forgiveness your heart can muster to that person and trusting that God will multiply its effect 1,000 times. Perhaps you're sitting down with your calendar and deciding how much time you feel able to give to the church rota or a volunteer role and are worried about the burden it might place on your energy levels. Now, of course, there is room for wisdom here. God's given us wisdom for a reason. But give me all that you have might mean offering more time than your instincts suggest, trusting that God will take your offering and provide the required energy and more. Or perhaps you're doing the dreaded household financial sort out, marveling at how little disposable income you seem to be left with each month. For us, this has often been followed by, oh yeah, but we did get a lot of takeaways this month. For me and Naomi, this has often been a tender area of our hearts. Money has been a tender area of our hearts when it comes to God's provision for some years now. We've asked ourselves all the questions that you can ask, it feels, about how much we should give to Christian charities, to the church, and why we absolutely do need Prime, Disney, and Netflix subscriptions at the same time. We've even asked the question, is there an income level that's too high for a Christian to aspire to? Sadly, though, that one's not become very relevant yet. You might be familiar with a story in Luke's Gospel, where Jesus comments on the attitudes of a poor widow and a bunch of rich people who are both putting money into the temple offering box. Now, first century Israel, a widow would be one of the most vulnerable people in society. She's got nobody looking out for her because she's lost her husband, who would have, in that culture, been the one that was earning the money and putting food on the table. So this is the poorest of the poor, essentially, in that context. And this is from Luke's Gospel. As Jesus looked up, he saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. Truly, I tell you, he said, this poor widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth. She, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. You'll understand the idea that proportionally, the widow has likely given more of her wealth than the rich people did. But did you spot that that's not what Jesus remarks on? He said, this poor widow has put in more than all the others. Not proportionally, not relatively more, just more. Now, I might be out on a theological limb here, but I think Jesus is saying that her gift may produce more good works, more blessing, more kingdom advancement than the objectively larger gifts of the rich who did not give so sacrificially. It's not just that the widow is demonstrating the attitude that Jesus wants for us, but I wonder if it's also about the kind of giving that will result in the kind of kingdom multiplication that we see in the bread and the fish. Now, when Naomi and I sat down for our most recent financial sort out that day, we didn't expect to end up increasing our monthly giving to Barton, or to start giving small amounts to 3 Christian charities and to her cousin, who's a missionary in Moldova, of all places. But we ended up feeling as though there was room in our finances to give more, without leading to us defaulting on our mortgage or not being able to buy food, maybe food that's not takeaway food, but food. And the result? We've felt more financially free than we have in years. I'm not sure I can put this down to any one thing in particular. There haven't been random unaddressed envelopes full of cash coming through our door, or long-lost uncles passing away and bequeathing me their mansions, although, I wouldn't say no. And if I spend some time trying to track it down, why I'm feeling differently, maybe I could find something. But I think the more encompassing answer comes in a mixture of the 3 gospel passages that we've read today. When we entrust a greater proportion of our time, our wealth or skills to kingdom purposes, God responds by multiplying it. This won't always mean that blessing comes back to us in a similar way. We should be clear that God is not an investment bank where we should simply expect to receive more back than we put in, be that time or money or energy. What God really wants from us and for us is the transformation of our hearts into hearts that will readily partner with him, transforming our family, our church family, and our workplaces into little pockets of his kingdom. When we learn to trust Jesus with our resources, he responds by multiplying those resources beyond our expectations to build his kingdom. Now, if you're hearing me and not feeling challenged by this, I can only say, well done, because you must be doing a way better job at this than I do. I had what I felt like, this was a while ago, a picture message from God at one point while I was praying in my car park at school, which sounds weird, but it's a thing that I do in my car. And considering the way that I viewed my income, monthly incomes. The picture was of somebody floating in the sea with a load of wreckage, almost like a ship had broken apart, and there were all these bits of driftwood all floating around, and there was no land in sight anywhere. And the person, who I guess is me, in this image was desperately clinging to a piece of the wreckage, trying to stay afloat. And the sense I got was these pieces of wreckage represented the material things that I feel a sense of safety because of their existence around me. My income and my possessions, yes, but also my leisure time that I guard like Smaug the dragon guards his jewels in The Hobbit. Worldly wisdom tells me that letting go of those flotation devices would be the least sensible thing of all. But God's kingdom looks upside down, the kingdom of the world. The sense I had in that image was that I should be trusting myself to the water, exercising the faith muscle that God has given me. Human bodies float, after all. And so I wonder, what flotation devices are you gripping too hard for your safety? Rather than letting God have all of those and letting the breath of life inside you keep you afloat. I'd love to encourage you to reflect on that question. And maybe choose to pray with somebody at the back after this during the worship. I think a brilliantly honest prayer for us all to consider praying in this is, Father, show me which loaves and fish I'm holding too tightly and I'm unwilling to give to you. And show me how I can entrust them to you. Now, our lives are going to be full of opportunities to share the gospel, to care for the oppressed, to contribute to the work of the church, and to take care of the outcasts of society. And when these moments come, and we're offered a choice between taking part in God's work or not, how are you responding to Jesus when he asks you how much food you have in your pack? Will you, like the disciples did, exasperated at your lack of capacity due to your intense schedule, your measly income, and draining week, respond with a defeated 5 loaves and 2 fish? What do you want me to do? Or will you, with the faith that comes from repeated decisions to trust Jesus, entrust the meager contents of your spiritual pantry to him with peace, confidently expecting that he will not only make do the little you have to offer, will make much, much more. So the next time you're at one of those moments and Jesus asks you how much food you've got, answer him like this: 5 loaves and 2 fish. What do you want me to do? Pray. Father God, we thank you for your inspired word in the Bible, and that there is so much wisdom that you long for us to gain through spending time meditating and discussing it and listening to other people that have thought about your word. We pray in our hearts as we consider what you might be bringing us to think today, that you would knock down barriers that we erect in all sorts of ways that we don't even notice your movement in our hearts. I pray in the next 10 or 15 minutes specifically, Lord, that you would meet with every person here. The Holy Spirit would touch nerves in our hearts that we have long forgotten or decided to press down. And that we would feel the glory of relationship with you that you offer us through your Son.